Picture this. You are on a beach somewhere, laptop open, drink nearby. Somewhere on the other side of the world, a virtual assistant paid $5 an hour is handling your email, booking your calls, and running your business while you do the bare minimum. That is the dream Tim Ferriss sold in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek. And millions of people bought it. But here's what actually happens when a scaling founder tries to implement it. They do not get freedom. They get a second job managing the system they built to replace themselves. So the real question is not whether The 4-Hour Workweek is a good book. It is whether it was ever written for you. To understand why the framework breaks down, you have to go back to where Ferriss was when he wrote it. The year was 2007. He was running a company called Brain Quicken, a sports nutrition supplement business he had built as a solo operator. One person, no employees, no culture to maintain, no leadership team to develop, no product roadmap that needed his hands on it every quarter. He was exhausted and trapped, not because the business was growing too fast, but because he had not built it to run without him at all. So he figured out how to systematize one small operation, handed it to a fulfillment company and some contractors, and left for a vacation that turned into a lifestyle. That experience became the book, and the book became a movement. The deal framework he built around it, definition, elimination, automation, liberation, is genuinely coherent as a lifestyle optimization system. You define what you actually want your life to look like. You eliminate the tasks that do not serve that vision. You automate or outsource whatever is left, and then you liberate yourself from the day-to-day so you can go live the life you defined in step one. For a person stuck in a job they hate, working for someone else's dream, grinding through a 50-hour week they never chose, this is oxygen. It reframes the entire relationship between work and living. That reframe alone is worth something. But notice what that framework assumes. It assumes you are optimizing one thing, a single income stream, one product, one operational layer, no team dynamics, no compounding culture, no investors, no hiring decisions, no growth trajectory that requires your judgment to steer. Ferriss' Muse, the low-maintenance cash flow vehicle at the center of the book, is not a company. It is a vending machine. You stock it, automate the refill, and walk away. The entire architecture of the advice is designed around that one use case. When a founder building a real company picks this book up, something important gets missed. They read the word eliminate and think about their calendar. They read the word automate and start shopping for virtual assistant services. They read the word liberate and start fantasizing about a month in Lisbon while the team holds things together. The words are the same, the context is completely different, and that gap is where the damage happens. The book as actual target reader is someone who wants out of a system they did not build and do not own. You are someone who built the system, owns it, and is responsible for the people inside it. Ferriss' advice is directionally appealing precisely because founders are exhausted in a similar way, running too many things with too little leverage. But the cause of that exhaustion is different, and so is the solution. The deal framework works perfectly for the reader it was written for. When a scaling founder applies it without that distinction, almost everything downstream goes wrong. So why does a founder pick this book up and feel almost immediately like someone finally understands them? Because Ferriss is a genuinely skilled persuader, not in a manipulative way, in a structural way. The book is engineered to land on someone at the exact moment their exhaustion becomes a liability. And founders are almost always reading it at that moment. 3 years in, maybe 4. The initial momentum has turned into operational weight. Every day is 100 small decisions pulling in different directions. The thing they built to give them freedom is now the thing demanding all of it. Then they open this book and it tells them that the problem isn't the business, it's them. Specifically, it's the false belief that more hours equals more output. That reframe hits hard because it's directionally true. Most founders really are doing too much low leverage work. The 80-20 framing Ferriss uses throughout the book, the idea that 20% of your inputs are generating 80% of your outcomes, lands because it describes something real. We've covered this before in our breakdown of the one thing, where Keller calls it the lead domino. The underlying math is the same. Most of what fills your day isn't moving the business forward. It's maintaining the illusion of progress. Ferriss names that clearly, and that naming alone feels like relief. The fear-setting exercise is probably the best single tool in the entire book. Ferriss walks you through systematically defining the worst-case scenario of any decision you've been avoiding, then mapping the cost of inaction against the cost of the feared outcome. It's a practical method for separating real risk from imagined risk, and for most founders it cuts through months of paralysis in a single afternoon. That tool is real, it works, but it gets bundled with everything else in the framework, and one genuinely useful exercise doesn't validate an entire operating system. There's also a psychological permission structure built into the book that's almost impossible to resist when you're running on empty. Ferriss isn't just telling you to work smarter, he's telling you it's okay to want less. That the hustle narrative you've been sold is a scam, that the people working 80-hour weeks aren't winning, they're just too busy to notice they're losing. For a founder who has spent years grinding and still feels behind, that message doesn't feel like advice. It feels like absolution. And that's exactly where it gets dangerous, because the permission structure doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't say, this applies once you've built the infrastructure to support it. It doesn't say, this works after you've documented your processes and developed a leadership layer. It just says you are allowed to stop. And when you hand that message to someone who is wired for achievement, who has been running at unsustainable intensity, who desperately wants a reason to pull back, they don't stress test the conditions. They just take the permission and run. We saw the same pattern in our video on atomic habits. High achievers don't misapply frameworks out of laziness. They misapply them because the frameworks solve for a real problem they have, just at the wrong resolution. Ferriss solves for the exhaustion. He doesn't solve for what the exhaustion is actually costing you to fix. That gap between the problem he names and the solution he prescribes is where the trap gets built. Let's talk about virtual assistants. The virtual assistant is the centerpiece of Ferriss's automation advice, and it's the place where the framework collapses fastest for founders who try to implement it seriously. The pitch is straightforward. Hire someone overseas for a few dollars an hour to handle your inbox, schedule your meetings, do your research, manage your calendar, offload the administrative layer entirely, free yourself up for the work that actually matters. On paper, it sounds like pure leverage. What actually happens is this. You spend 40 minutes writing instructions for a task that would have taken you 12 minutes to do. The virtual assistant completes it. You spend 20 minutes reviewing the output and correcting 3 things that do not match how you actually think. Then a follow-up comes in that requires context the virtual assistant does not have, so you handle it yourself anyway. By the end of the week, you have not saved time. You have added a supervision layer on top of the same workload, and you are now responsible for someone else's output quality on top of your own. The math on this only works if you never account for management overhead. Ferriss does not account for it. The book treats delegation as subtraction when it is actually addition, at least initially. You are not removing work from your plate. You are converting direct work into supervisory work, and supervisory work pulls from the same cognitive budget. Cal Newport's research on attention residue is directly relevant here. Every time you hand a task off, your brain does not fully disengage from it. You are waiting on the output. You are holding context about what you asked for. When the output comes back wrong, which it often does when the person doing it lacks the accumulated judgment you have built over years, you have to reload all that context and correct it. Each one of those handoffs is a small withdrawal from the same finite pool of focus we covered in the deep work breakdown. You thought you were protecting that pool, you are actually draining it through a dozen small leaks you did not see coming. There is a specific failure mode that hits founders harder than most. When a virtual assistant manages your inbox, they are filtering your information. Ferriss frames this as a feature. You only see what has been pre-sorted as important. But for a founder in the scaling phase, your inbox is not just a task list. It is a signal feed. A complaint that keeps showing up is a product gap. A sales objection that appears 3 times in a week is market intelligence. A team member who emails you directly instead of using the proper channel is telling you something about psychological safety inside the organization. When someone else filters that stream, you stop seeing the patterns. You get a clean inbox and a blind spot where your most useful feedback used to live. Ferriss wrote this advice in a world before Slack, Notion, Loom, and the modern async communication stack. When the book came out, the only way to reduce communication overhead was to reduce communication. That is no longer true. A well-structured async system can cut reactive interruptions by half without handing your information flow to someone who does not understand your business. The operational landscape changed. The advice did not. Keller's lead domino concept sharpens this further. The goal of any leverage decision should be to protect your highest value work, the single activity that makes the most other things unnecessary. Outsourcing your calendar to a virtual assistant does not do that. It just moves low-value administrative friction one step away while adding a new coordination cost. You have not identified your lead domino. You have just hired someone to manage the dominoes you should have stopped touching entirely. The founders who actually scale past 7 figures are not the ones who outsourced their lives. They are the ones who built systems that do not require anyone, including themselves, to be the manager of every moving part. That is a fundamentally different objective than what Ferriss is describing, and getting those two things confused is what costs the most time in the long run. The outsourcing problem is real and fixable, but it points towards something deeper in the framework, which is the way Ferriss thinks about information itself. Ferriss devotes a full chapter to what he calls the low information diet. The prescription is aggressive. Stop reading the news, declare email bankruptcy, ignore most of what comes across your desk, and ruthlessly cut your information inputs down to the bare minimum. For his target reader, the person drowning in other people's urgencies with no real stake in any of them, this is genuinely liberating advice. If you are a salaried employee whose daily news consumption is mostly anxiety fuel with no actionable output, cutting it costs you almost nothing. But a scaling founder is not consuming information passively. You are consuming it diagnostically. When a customer emails to say the onboarding process confused them, that is not noise. That is a signal about where your product loses people. When a competitor drops their price by 20%, that is not a distraction. That is a constraint that just changed your positioning options. When 3 of your best salespeople all mention the same objection in the same week, that is not an inbox problem. That is your product roadmap talking to you. The low information diet treats all of this the same way it treats celebrity news, as clutter to be filtered out. For a founder, that conflation is not just wrong, it is operationally dangerous. The real distinction Ferriss misses is the difference between information elimination and information curation. Elimination means you stop receiving the signal entirely. Curation means you create a system that gets you the right signal at the right time, without reactive noise filling the gaps between. Those two things produce completely different outcomes. A founder needs the second. The first just creates blind spots. You will not notice until a problem has already compounded past the point where you could have caught it early. Newport draws this line cleanly in his framework around deep work. The goal is not less information. It is protected time to process the right information at depth without fragmentation. That is a scheduling and architecture problem, not a consumption problem. What Newport is really describing is the same thing Ferriss is reaching for: cognitive energy protection. He gets the mechanism right. You do not protect your cognitive energy by starving yourself of input. You protect it by controlling when and how you engage with input, so it serves your thinking rather than interrupting it. Here is the part where Ferriss actually lands on something useful but frames it wrong. The batching advice buried inside the low information diet is solid. Check email twice a day at defined times. Cluster your meetings into blocks instead of scattering them across the week. Reduce the surface area of reactive communication. That is not elimination. That is scheduling. And scheduling works. The problem is that Ferriss packages this genuinely practical advice inside a broader argument about avoidance, and founders who take the whole package end up cutting signal along with noise. The 80-20 client analysis is where this gets most costly. Ferriss recommends identifying the 20% of clients causing 80% of your headaches and cutting them. For a solo operator running a consulting practice or a single product business, that math can work. But for a founder whose difficult clients are actually testing edge cases in the product, revealing gaps in the support process, or pushing on pricing assumptions the market has not validated yet, those clients are not your problem. They are your early warning system. Fire them and you do not get less stress. You get less information about what breaks next. The honest reframe on everything in this section is this: Ferriss is trying to solve for cognitive energy, and that is the right problem. But the solution is not less input, it is better architecture for how input reaches you and when you process it. Get that architecture right, and the low information diet becomes unnecessary. Get it wrong, and you are just trading one kind of overload for a quieter, more dangerous kind of ignorance. Liberation is the final stage of the deal framework, and on the surface it sounds like the whole point. You have defined what you want, eliminated the waste, automated the rest, and now you step back. The business runs, you live. That is the promise. For a solo operator with a single product and no team, stepping back is a logistics problem. You set up the systems, you verify they work, and you leave. The machine either runs or it does not, and the only person affected by the answer is you. But for a founder with 10 people on payroll, a product that is still finding its ceiling, and a culture that is still taking shape, removing yourself is not a logistics problem. It is a leadership decision with consequences that compound long after you have boarded the flight. The management bottleneck paradox works like this. A founder reads the liberation chapter, becomes inspired, and starts pulling back from daily operations before the infrastructure exists to absorb that withdrawal. Decisions that used to get made in 30 seconds because you were in the room now take 2 days because nobody has the authority or the context to make them without you. Problems that used to surface immediately because you were watching the signals now fester for a week before anyone escalates. The business does not run itself in your absence. It runs slowly and badly, and then you come back to a pile of fires that are bigger than anything you left behind. Michael Gerber made the right distinction in the E-myth. Working on the business versus working in it is a real and useful separation. The mistake most founders make is not that they stay too close to the daily work. The real mistake is trying to skip the step where you actually build the machine that runs without you. Gerber argues that the franchise model, the idea of documenting every process so thoroughly that anyone could execute it, must come before liberation is possible. Ferriss acknowledges this in passing, but treats it as a footnote rather than a prerequisite. That ordering error is what makes the liberation chapter dangerous. The mini-retirement concept makes this concrete. Ferriss recommends taking extended breaks throughout your working life rather than deferring all rest to traditional retirement. In principle, recovery matters, and most founders are chronically under-recovered. But your company's growth trajectory does not pause while you recharge. There are windows in any business where the decisions you make in a 30-day stretch will shape the next 2 years. A product launch, a key hire, a competitive threat that requires a fast response, a funding conversation that needs your judgment present. Disappearing during one of those windows is not a lifestyle choice. It is an abdication of the one role nobody else in the organization can play at that stage. Fried and Hansen addressed this more honestly in It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Their argument is that calm, sustainable companies are built through deliberate architecture over years, not through a founder checking out early and hoping the scaffolding holds. The version of freedom they describe looks less like a beach and more like a business that has genuinely outgrown its dependence on any single person, including you, that outcome is real and achievable. It just requires the opposite sequence from what Ferriss prescribes. You build the architecture first, then you step back into it. There is also a trust dimension here that the book never addresses. Your team is watching you. When a founder starts lifestyle designing their way out of the building before the company is ready to absorb that absence, people notice, not necessarily with resentment, but with a recalibration of their own commitment. Culture is not built by the values you post on the wall. It is built by the decisions you make under pressure and the moments you show up when it would have been easier not to. A founder who vanishes to Bali during a growth inflection point sends a signal about priorities that no Notion document can undo. What liberation actually requires, before it works at any scale, is a documented system for every critical process, a leadership layer with real decision-making authority, a product stable enough to run without daily input, and a culture grounded in principles rather than the founder's constant presence. None of that is in the 4-hour work week. And without it, liberation does not produce freedom. It produces a vacuum your business will fill with chaos, and you will spend more time managing the fallout than you ever spent just doing the work. So after 5 sections of pulling this framework apart, let us be honest about what actually holds up. Because there are real ideas in this book, and dismissing all of it because the liberation sequence is broken would be its own kind of mistake. Start with fear setting, because this is the one tool in the book that works regardless of your context. The exercise is simple. You take a decision you have been avoiding, map every realistic worst-case outcome, estimate the cost of each one, then map the cost of doing nothing for another 6 months. Most founders who run this honestly discover that the thing they have been procrastinating on is not actually that risky. The risk was never in the decision. It was in the anxiety they had been feeding by not making it. Fear setting is a practical method for draining that anxiety and getting to a clear-eyed assessment of what is actually at stake. It works in a job, it works in a company, and it works whether you are a solo operator or running a team of 50. The 80-20 audit is worth keeping too, but only if you redirect it. As we covered, applying it to clients can cut your early warning system off at the knees. The more useful application is to your own activity and specifically your calendar. Run a real audit of how you spent last week, not how you think you spent it. Then ask Keller's focusing question over the results. Which 20% of those activities drove 80% of what actually moved the business forward? That answer will almost always surprise you. And the follow-up question, why did the other 80% of my time go anywhere else, is where the real work begins. Dreamlining, Ferriss's goal clarification tool, looks like lifestyle fantasy on the surface, but it has a legitimate application when you strip the beach vacation framing out of it. The core mechanic is asking, what does my working life need to look like in 6 months for me to have real operational freedom? Not a fantasy version, a specific one with a named constraint sitting between here and there. What is the one thing that, if it were solved, would unlock the most structural freedom in how you work? That is a useful question. It is basically Newport's bimodal philosophy and Keller's lead domino wrapped in different language. The destination Ferriss points at is the right one. His map for getting there is what needs replacing. Parkinson's law might be the most immediately actionable idea in the entire book. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Ferriss applies this to whole workdays, arguing you can compress a full week into focused hours by artificially tightening the container. That is mostly right. When a deadline is tight, prioritization happens automatically because it has to. The practical version of this for founders is not compressing your whole week. It is running time-boxed sprints on your highest leverage deliverables. Give a hard problem 2 hours instead of an open afternoon, and you will often find the 2-hour version produces better output because your brain cannot afford to wander. The honest summary of all of it is this: The 4-Hour Workweek is a mindset book wearing a systems book's clothing. The mindset shift underneath everything, that your time is finite, that most of what fills it is optional, and that you have more control over the ratio than you have been exercising, is correct and worth internalizing fully. What needs replacing is the implementation layer. The sequence is wrong, the tools are incomplete, and the context it was built for was never yours to begin with. If the 4-Hour Workweek gets the destination right, but the sequence wrong, the question worth answering is, what does the correct sequence actually look like? The inversion is simple to state and genuinely hard to execute. You build the system first, then you step back, not the reverse. Every founder who has achieved real operational freedom, the kind where the business runs without their daily presence, got there by doing the construction before the departure. Ferriss describes the departure without describing the construction, and that missing chapter is the whole game. David Jennings' systemology and Sam Carpenter's Work the System both make this argument more rigorously than any lifestyle design book does. The core idea in both is that a business is a collection of repeatable processes, and your job as a founder is to document those processes so thoroughly that execution stops depending on your personal judgment at every step. Not because your judgment does not matter, but because judgment that lives only inside your head is a single point of failure. The moment you are unavailable, sick, traveling, or just trying to think about something else, the whole operation waits on you. Documented systems convert your judgment into transferable infrastructure. That is the actual mechanism of founder freedom, not a virtual assistant inbox and a flight to Lisbon. The delegation question follows directly from this. Ferriss's version of delegation is task-based. Here is a thing I do not want to do. Find someone cheaper to do it. The more durable version is outcome-based. Here is a result the business needs. Here is the authority and context required to achieve it. Now own it. That shift changes everything downstream. A person executing a checklist under your supervision is a cost center. A person accountable for an outcome with the authority to figure out how to get there is a leverage multiplier. The difference between those two things is not just operational, it is cultural. One builds dependence, the other builds capability. Newport's bimodal deep work structure applies here in a way that reframes what founder freedom can actually look like in practice. Instead of aiming for a 4-hour work week, which requires infrastructure most scaling founders have not built yet, aim for 2 or 3 full days per week where you are doing nothing but deep work. Strategy, product thinking, the relationships that shape the next 12 months. Let the documented systems carry the operational weight on the other days. That is not a fantasy. It is achievable within 12 to 18 months of serious system building, and it produces the same cognitive freedom Ferriss promises without the abdication risk. Before you eliminate, automate, or delegate anything, run Keller's focusing question over it. What is the one thing that, if done consistently, makes everything else easier or unnecessary? That question has to come before the deal framework, not after it. If you start eliminating before you have identified your lead domino, you might eliminate the wrong things. Protect the highest leverage work first. Systematize everything else second. That ordering is not just semantics. It is the difference between a business that gets faster and a business that just gets quieter. The honest benchmark is this: a founder working 30 focused hours per week on genuinely high leverage activities will build more in a year than one working 60 fragmented hours reacting to whatever the day brought in. But those 30 focused hours do not materialize through intention alone. They require infrastructure. Documented processes that do not need you to supervise them. A leadership layer that can absorb decisions without escalating everything upward. A calendar architecture that protects depth before it protects availability. Ferriss gives you permission to want that outcome. These frameworks give you the mechanics to actually build it. If you want to read the 4-hour workweek yourself and test these arguments against your own situation, the link is in the description. It is an Amazon affiliate link, so I earn a small commission at no extra cost to you. Read it for the mindset. Build your own implementation layer from the ground up. Everything in this video points at the same underlying problem. Ferriss names it correctly. Your cognitive energy is finite, and most of what fills your day is burning through it on the wrong things. That part is right, but the solution he prescribes, outsourcing your inbox, cutting your information diet, stepping back before the infrastructure exists, does not protect your cognitive energy. It just redistributes where it leaks. Here's what that means for you. If you walked away from this video thinking the fix is working fewer hours, you have still got the wrong frame. The founders who actually compound over time are not the ones who worked less. They are the ones who figured out which hours produce output that nothing else can replace, and then built a system that makes everything else stop competing for those hours. That is a completely different problem from what Ferriss is solving. And there is one book that goes deeper on the mechanics of it than anything else we have covered on this channel. Most people who read it think it is about focus. It is not. It is about why the way you are currently working is making you worse at the thing you are actually supposed to be doing. And it happens so gradually you will not notice until the capacity is already gone. That video is up on the screen now. Click it.